Story, though, and that is Ukraine. President Obama has made his strongest statement yet against Russian President Vladimir Putin's aggression in Ukraine to a collective shrug from the Kremlin. Last night, Putin signed a document formally declaring Crimea a, quote, sovereign and independent state. It follows Sunday's vote in which 95% came out in favor of annexation from Ukraine. The White House called that referendum illegal and illegitimate. They may have a point since there were no other options on the ballot. Earlier in the day, President Obama announced targeted sanctions against 11 Russian and Ukrainian officials in hopes of putting pressure on Vladimir Putin's inner circle. Now, speaking from the White House briefing room, the president said this could be just the first step if Russia does not reverse course.
We are imposing sanctions on specific individuals responsible for undermining the sovereignty, territorial integrity, and government of Ukraine. We're making it clear that there are consequences for their actions. If Russia continues to interfere in Ukraine, we stand ready to impose further sanctions. We'll continue to make clear to Russia that further provocations will achieve nothing except to further isolate Russia and diminish its place in the world.
Now, according to the Daily Beast, Josh Rogin, Russian officials are responding with sanctions of their own against our own U.S. senators and congressmen. Rogin reports that Putin is expected to release his own sanction list as early as today. But it isn't only Vladimir Putin who's appearing to scoff at the president's move. Here at home, he's facing criticism. President Obama is facing critics who say he's not going far enough.
I think Vladimir Putin must be encouraged by the absolute timidity. The president said we will, quote, consider other options. The president should have said we're going to provide military assistance to Ukraine, and that will be in defensive weaponry.
That is an ultimate option. Joining us from Washington now, Josh Rogin, senior correspondent for the Daily Beast. Tell us, Josh, you've been reporting on these sanctions that are going to be imposed on U.S. senators. What could they be?
Right. So yesterday, the president told 11 Russian and Ukrainian officials that they can't come to America to go shopping. And so now Putin's going to tell a bunch of U.S. senators that they can't go to St. Petersburg to go shopping, or wherever it is that people go shopping in Russia. These tit-for-tat sort of naming and shaming sanctions are really not likely to solve the crisis in Crimea, but they sort of represent steady retaliatory escalation of the crisis between the U.S. and Russia over Ukraine. The sanctions are going to have travel bans, asset bans. John McCain actually told me he wants to be on the list. He said he'd be honored by it, and he said he doesn't really have that much secret money in St. Petersburg anyway, so he's not really worried about the effects of it. You know, I think in the end, no matter what the administration does here, and it should be pointed out that these are the first batch of sanctions, there could be several rounds to follow. None of it will ever be enough for those both in Washington and Moscow who believe that we need to throw the book at Putin. At the same time, there's very little that the administration could actually do to force Russia to leave Crimea. I mean, no sanctions are going to do that. In the end, Crimea is always going to be more important to Vladimir Putin than it is to us. So the administration is working through these issues. They're trying to figure out what can we do to look tough enough to hold off the criticism from guys like John McCain, and at the same time, how do we not get so far down this road that we commit to a bunch of economic sanctions that we can't get out of, and hurt our own economy in the process and still lose Crimea anyway.
There you go.
Chuck Todd, once Dick Durbin gets over the disappointment of not being able to go to Minsk for a hot tub or whatever later this week, the administration, as Josh has pointed out, is clearly climbing the ladder here in terms of punitive actions that we can take toward Russia. What is on the drawing board? Have you heard? What speculation is out there about what's on the drawing board? Where do we go from here, barring, we're not going to send the Marine Corps over there?
No, and I think, though, that the question is there going to be more of an aggressive an attempt to, say, use NATO? You know, do you start the process with Ukraine and the NATO process more aggressively? Do you fully make Georgia a member? They've been sort of sitting in this no man's land. How aggressively do you use NATO here as a check on Putin? And that's been, I think, one of the substantive disagreements, particularly among sort of the shrinking hawk wing of the Republican Party that's been very vocal, McCain, Bob Corker, folks like that, and where the administration is going. I think it's the administration, and this has just been standard Obama for the last 5 or 6 years in a situation like this. It's going to be a slow increase in what they do on this sanction front. For some, it's never going to be fast enough. It does seem to me as if the criticism that's coming from McCain and Corker really is more stylistic than it is substantive. They're disagreeing on, how many people are being sanctioned right now, how aggressive the sanctions are. But there does seem to be, the administration's point of view is, hey, this has got to be done in concert with the EU and other economic powers, so everybody should move together, move as fast as they can together, and that's been some of the disagreements. But I think the question is, and I've been surprised at how little the administration has saber-rattled on NATO.
Josh Rogin, Mark Halpern here. Who are the big strategic thinkers in the administration on how to deal with Russia? We've seen tactics since this story began, but who are the big strategic thinkers, and what is their long-term plan for dealing with Putin and Russia?
Right. Your question presupposes they have one. I guess what we can say here is that the administration's reaction to this crisis has been reactive from the start. There has been, the myth of this whole Russia invasion is that it happened overnight. The fact is that the way Putin works is he actually does these things quite slowly. They were working in Ukraine to undermine, the opposition for a while. We were trying to combat that for a while. In the end, Putin unveiled the invasion of Crimea sort of in slow motion, and he keeps pushing and pushing to test where the limits are. And eventually he reached the limits, and the international community responded. Now if you're looking 2-3 weeks down the road, sure, there is a plan. The plan is to move from sanctions against individuals to sanctions against entities, against organizations, maybe banks, maybe to go after Russia's ability to work in the world financial markets. These are the real big sanctions. These are like the Iran-type sanctions, the ones that really hurt an economy. Now that's a problem, because if we can hurt their economy, they can hurt our economy, or they could respond in in Iran, in Afghanistan, in Syria, and we go down this road of escalation. We don't really know where it ends. Now, what's the big-term strategic picture? That's what Joe Biden is doing right now. He's going to Poland. He's going to Lithuania. We're going to send some planes there. We're going to move some stuff around, and we're going to show Russia that, listen, we actually do have a big stick here, and if you really cross our quote-unquote red line, which is the invasion of Ukraine Eastern, that would have real consequences that would involve a whole bunch of countries.
All right, so, it's kind of also hard to know what your end game is when you're dealing with a person who can go from literally a shining Olympic moment in Sochi to echoes of the Cold War in the course of a month. So,
right.
I don't know what an end game with someone like that is.
Well, the problem is, if you keep escalating,
exactly.
When is it going to be more important to us than it is to him?
Exactly.
This is Ukraine. This is Russia's back door. They have a 400-year, relationship, right? In the end, if we play chicken with Putin, we're going to blink first, because it's just not as important to us, and it's definitely not as important to the Europeans. Okay, and we're monitoring Putin right now, who's addressing the Russian parliament. So we'll let you know if anything comes out of that. Josh Rogin, thank you very much. Sure.
Just a note, we'll have the Senate's #2 Democrat